is Hanoch Teller, and I welcome you to the Vayichan program. We're going to be talking about the disparate world that all united together with Achdus and the Shanghai Ghetto, Ghetto, during World War II, located in Shanghai, China. We have two very, very distinguished panelists joining us. Both of them were actually there. So I'm telling you, as a student of history, they were living history. I'm going to get to our distinguished panelists, Rebbe Chayle Small, currently in Chicago, of course, and Dr. Donath, who lives in Riverdale, in Scarsdale. Is that correct? Scarsdale, Westchester, and here I am in Yerushalayim. So let me just begin by firstly thanking the brainchild of Vayichan, that's Rabbi Reuven Tarragon, the great visionary and also the great unifier, who conceived of the idea of Vayichan program. I also want to thank Professor Vera Schwartz, who in many ways was the shadchan for today's program because she wrote the most brilliant book. She doesn't have to do anything other than brilliant, but Professor Schwartz is a history professor in Chinese. She's a poet. She's a Baha'i and a Shama, and all this came together in the book, and every single word. I never read a more brilliant book, with perhaps the exception of Diane Medved's masterwork. This is the book, for those, if you can see it, it's called In the Crook of the Rock, Jewish Refuge in a World Gone Wild, the Chaya Leah Walken story. Chaya Walken later became Chaya Small, gracing your screen. It is the most utterly intelligent book, but okay, enough about that. And as I was reading the book, praying that it would never end, I came across this piece of history that in the Shanghai Ghetto, where the Jews were forced, Dr. Donath can perhaps expand upon this later, forced to congregate. They were literally a ghetto, they were forced to enter, which had all the squalor, the disease, the hunger, the filth of a ghetto, a lot of overcrowding. In that wildly disparate world, which was the Yeshiva community, about 20,000 Austrian Jews, also German Jews, also Baghdadi Jews, Eastern European, North African Jews, and they, I believe, are certainly Middle Eastern Jews, all of them displayed by and large an Achdus that is memorable and remarkable, certainly inspiring for all of us, hence our connection to the program. I also want to point out that in the Shanghai Ghetto, despite disparity, that lesson, right, we said it, that's our lesson for today. Now, I think I owe you, in the viewing audience, before we get to our distinguished panel, a little bit of the history of how the Jews ended up, at least the Mir Yeshiva ended up in Shanghai, or in the Orient. As you know, here's a brief lesson of history. If you want to read more in depth, I would recommend you go to, For the Love of Torah, the biography of Rav Nosson Finkel, where there's a chapter about how the Jews ended up in Shanghai. Coincidentally, Teller wrote that book. Okay, so what happened was there's the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which left Vilna as under Soviet control. The Gadol Hador, the most prominent rabbi of the generation of Chaim Moshe Grudzinski, saw that here there was a window of opportunity because now Vilna did not have governmental restrictions. You did not need to enter Vilna with a passport or a visa. He ordered all the yeshivos to come to Vilna, even for men traveling by rail on Shabbos. So Mir and Baranovich and Kletsk and Slutsk and Amshinov and Lubavitch traveled to Vilna, and the Gadol Hador, suffering, although no one is aware of this, from terminal cancer, takes everyone under his wing. Now, for all the safety that Vilna accorded, it was still a ticking time bomb. And they knew that either the Germans would invade, which meant the end of Jewish life, or the Russians would invade, and it meant also the end of Jewish life, but they didn't realize that the Germans invaded meant the end of life, period. So something had to be done. Ostensibly, freedom could be obtained with a passport or a visa, but there wasn't a country in the world that was offering refuge to Jews in 1939. Then came a student in the Telz Yeshiva named Nachum Gutwirth from Holland, whose mother said, get out. He went to the Dutch council and said, I want to go home. And he said to him, I regret to inform you, but as of already the spring of 1940, all the Low Countries were conquered by Germany. We don't exist. So he said, what about Curacao, which is in the Bahamas or the West Indies, north of Venezuela? That was a Dutch colony. He said, that is true. But to go to Curacao, you do not need a visa. You need a landing permit from the governor of the island. So then, Pesla Lewin, the mother of the very famous attorney, super lawyer, Nat Lewin, and she's famous for many reasons, but Nadler was an extremely famous individual. She came up with this brilliant idea to get her husband a visa. She said, just write no visa required to Curacao and leave off the end of the sentence the fact that to get there you need a landing permit from the governor of the island. He bought the idea, so it looks official, but it has no meaning. So now we have Jews from Lithuania or from Poland, and Poland has been conquered, it doesn't exist. But there was a lucky break in history, we call this Hashgacha Pratit, called the Anglo-Franco Alliance. And that meant that England and France would recognize Poland if Germany invaded, and that is what in fact what happened. So they had a Polish passport which just said Poland on top. It was worth nothing. It was worth as much as a Confederate passport. And now they need a visa. In September 39, a remarkable hero comes to Lithuania. His name is Senpo Sugihara. He becomes the Japanese ambassador in Kovna, and Sugihara is a man with a very large heart. Soon his embassy becomes a very, very popular place. A student from the Mir Yeshiva learned about this, no visa required, no landing permit, no visa required to Curacao, which is akin to saying no cost for air. Everyone knows air is free. He says, I'm making a trip around the world. Would you mind if I stop off in Japan along the way? He said, let me see your passport. It says, no visa required to Curacao. I said, okay. He gave him a 21-day transit visa to go to Japan. Soon more learned about it, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, there are thousands of Jews clamoring to receive a visa to Japan, a transit visa on their way to Curacao. Mind you, that would be akin to traveling from America to England via Argentina. And yet, he's happy to oblige. Now, the government of Japan doesn't know why in the world he wants to do this. They're not being very forthright, not being very helpful, but on his own accord and volition, Sugihara issues visas to every request, and he gets people from the Mir Yeshiva to help him process the visas. We're talking about 1 year before the extermination camps are running full tilt, and now thousands are getting transit visas to Japan for 21 days. The catch is you have to leave. And how do you leave? Russia. This is, right, Lithuania, Poland, this is occupied now by the Russians. And to the north and east is Russia. No one ever left Russia. The south and the west is Nazi-occupied Europe. But the Russians opened up an immigration office, one in Lithuania, one in Poland. It was controlled by the NKVD, which preceded the KGB. And everyone knew it was a ruse. They wouldn't let you out. But the rabbi said, we have no choice. So they lined up, and thanks to money which came in from abroad, Hayas, the Vahatzola, the Joint, they were able to acquire visas which cost $200 American. That was a very significant amount of money. They registered, and they had to pay with American dollars, and having American dollars in Russia meant a trip to Siberia. And yet they got the visas. They traveled 12 time zones all the way from the western side of Russia, from Lithuania. They made themselves to Vladivostok and crossed the Straits of Japan, and landing first in Kobe, Japan. And finally, we begin our story. And then after 6 months in Kobe, the Japanese then expel them onto Shanghai, and brings us to our distinguished panelists who will tell us about the Shanghai, what life was like in Shanghai, and particularly for our program today, the unity that was displayed among the disparate world of Shanghai. One last time, I don't know where you find them on your screen. We have Dr. Donath, who was there as a young boy coming from Austria, and I feel very distinguished. We both were born in Vienna. You were born, I assume, before the war, before the Anschluss. I was born well over 10 years after the war. And Rebbe Small, who was from Lithuania, correct? Or Poland, Lithuania? Rebbe Small, where are you from?
We went from Poland to Lithuania.
You were born in
Lithuania, okay.
Belarus.
Belarus, okay, even better. And okay, lady and gentlemen, please take it away. Tell us about where you were in Shanghai.
You want me to start first, Rabbi?
Yes.
Okay, just to tell you what happened with our family. We did not leave Vienna till 1940. My father had a business in Vienna, so he was one of those people that thought things would blow over, and obviously they never did, and it was a last-minute effort on his part to get out. It cost him a lot of money, but in terms of paying off certain people to be able to get out of Vienna at that time. And we were scheduled to go to Italy, which we did, and head towards New Zealand. When we got to Italy, it turns out that the U-boat warfare had begun, and the Germans said no more traffic across the Mediterranean. So my father had to make a U-turn, and that was the last place that was open to Jews was Shanghai, because as you pointed out earlier, there was no paperwork required. So all you had to do was buy passage on a steamship, and we got onto the second to last steamship in 1940, and we arrived in Shanghai in April of 1940. At that time, my father still had some resources, and we lived, as I mentioned to you earlier, that we lived in the French concession, which was a very elegant part of the city, till about 1943, which is when the Japanese edicted that any refugees that had come to Shanghai after 1938 had to move to this ghetto. And so we wound up, my brother and I and my parents, in one room in a relatively nice building, which is part of a compound. It was surrounded by a gate and a fence, a metal fence, and it kept out anybody from the outside coming into this compound. So it was relatively upscale compared to the conditions that existed in Shanghai. So it's at that point that my good friend Haya and her family, who had moved into the building adjacent to ours, we became very, very friendly. And life, fortunately, even though there were significant deprivations going on among many of the refugees, lack of medicines, lack of food, there were all kinds of diseases going on, like dysentery and cholera and so forth. Many people died among the Jews, but we fortunately managed to survive under the circumstances. And
if I may interrupt you for just 1 second, if it's okay, because I want to keep to the theme of today, not just the history, is that Dr. Donath mentioned that he was next door neighbors to the Vayichan family, Chayleia's family, and they were friendly. Now we're talking about two very disparate worlds. Dr. Donath is coming from a enlightened Viennese family that was not observant, and the Vayichan family is a family of Gedolei Yisrael that were Rosh Yeshivas in Lithuania. Chayleia's brother is one of the Gedolei Bali Musar of our generation. So just to get an idea of where they're coming from and where they are, and yet they were living as not just neighbors, but as with friendship.
Absolutely, I was very friendly, not only with the Haya and her sister, but her brother at that time. So we played all the time together, and we celebrated a lot of things. For example, just anecdotally, the first time in my life when as they say in Yiddish, if your audience understands a few words, I was subjected to Schlugen Kaporis during the high holiday season, and we also had a sukkah in our compound that the Vayichan family was instrumental. So we lived in the sukkah, had our meals. We did a lot of things together. We were very friendly, and a lot of it is due to Chaya's distinguished father, the Mayor Rabbi Shmuel welcomed me.
Very remarkable. You're talking about 180,000 Jews in Vienna after World War I, and your first experience with the sukkah was in Shanghai, China.
Right. Well, I was a youngster when we got there, but that's absolutely true. And I went to Talmud Torah in Shanghai. We had a number of shuls there, but they're all Orthodox shuls. But people like me who came from, as you say, not a very strict Orthodox background. We went there to shuls regularly on the Shabbat services, and etc. And we got very acclimated to doing things in the Orthodox way. So there was no discrimination as to whether you were a Reformed Jew or a conservative Jew. We didn't have that. There were shuls that were really traditionally Orthodox. At the time, there were no different denominations.
Excuse me, Reb Small, please pardon us for violating the critical rule of ladies first. But you're on now.
You're on. Talk about what your experience was.
I'm sorry, it takes me a little while. Speaking with Paul, by the way, Paul became Shomer Shabbos. That's Eric's older brother. All I think to the influence of what he had through the life in Shanghai. I went to the Kaduri school. I went to the Shanghai Jewish school. Our home that I want to talk about, my father was one that was open to everyone, no matter who. My father had the theory, I eat as I eat, a Jew is a Jew, and we have to help, because everyone is born with Tselem Elohim. Coming to Shanghai were the Mir Yeshiva. Now, in that time, we had about, I would say, 6 or 7 married people with children. The rest were the yeshiva life. These were boys from the ages of 14, 15, up to 21, alone. So who became their father figure? My father. And our home was constantly with yeshiva boys. Food was sparse, but we always had food. It was a little bit, but we shared. And then also in the ghetto, there was a large group of German Jews. They joined. They wanted to have more. It was German Jews who were, like my friend Charlotte Eisenberg, there were Eva Schulhag, my teacher, who wanted more out of life, and they joined the Orthodox community. Those were all young people. We built a shelter, as Eric had said, the sukkah. We had a shelter. We lived a normal life. We did not have to go on a march. We did not have to scurry for potato peels. You crossed away from our compound was a market. Whoever had money was able to buy, not a lot. We had hunger days also, but we lived. We had Shabbos, we had Yantiv, we had Rosh Hashanah. As Eric said, Shlon Kaporis. Rosh Hashanah was a day of awe and fear. Purim, going down to the shul, the Ohel Vachel in the French concession, was the highlight of us. The community, the Sfardim, the Ashkenazim, the German Jews, the Austrian Jews, everybody was like one big family, sharing together the good and the bad. The bombing, when it came to America, when they bombed us, we all joined together. The stories of Israel, of Shanghai, is a miracle to us, because Poland was completely eradicated from any yeshiva. Yet that little group of Mir Yeshiva, Chachmei Lublin, all the little yeshiva boys, who a total of 125, built up today a world, a total world. When you go down any place, that came from the Yeshivah World, the group that ended up in Shanghai. So when I look at Shanghai being a haven, but it was also a nest. The biggest nest that we had is the saving of the world in Shanghai through a Japanese diplomat who went against all odds, did not obey the emperor, and gave us visas. And there were 3 people involved in this odyssey. It was Shugahara, who gave us the visas. It was Ney, who was not supposed to let us get off in Vladivostok, disobeyed his superiors and let us embark. And then there was Abraham Kutsusi, who here we're coming into a strange land. We speak Yiddish, we speak Hebrew, we're coming into a land of Japanese. And there is one man who decided to study the Talmud, was fascinated by the Yiddish world, and spoke Hebrew. And he and the Amshel Rebbe were the interpreters when we had to come to the Japanese for any request that we needed. So you see, everything was not Derech HaTeva. Every day there were miracles and miracles, and only because we were all in it together.
Okay, 1 second, Rebbe, wonderful. We only have about 4 minutes left. So the miracles they're simply astounding. In the place of Katsuji, that this man would know Hebrew and have an interest in Jews and ultimately converted to Judaism himself. It's a remarkable story, but let's focus now with the 4 minutes that remain between our 2 panelists, just to try and how we can code a lesson for ourselves in today's age of how we can live together, even if we are disparate, different outlooks and lifestyles.
Let's see.
You have 4 minutes left to talk about how.
Dr. Donat, you have something to contribute, please? What you learned from Shanghai?
I don't know if it was so different in lifestyle. I'm not going to say that. You have to understand the wealthy German Jews who came, it was humbling for them. But yet we reached out to them. Of course, they had everything. When those who came from Austria came with homes that were upscale, they had everything going for them, and all of a sudden you're coming into a slum. They had trouble adjusting to that. But we all reached out together. When there was no food, my father and Rabbi Ashkenazi opened a soup kitchen. And one of the German Jews would come, they would sit down and eat. They always made sure to put on a yarmulke. There were little things, we just lived together. We survived together. I never saw any problems. We played together, went to school together.
Okay. Let's hear Dr. Donath.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you asked the question, how can we translate that into today's world? My observation would be the following. We tend to put labels today in terms of different denominations, whether it's Reform or Reconstructionist or conservative or otherwise. I personally feel that we're all Jews. We're born Jews, and labels are not necessarily complementary to us. We should forget about labels and welcome everybody and anybody as a Jew, no matter what his or her level of observance is. That would go a long way towards unifying the Jewish people, because once you're born as a Jew, you're a Jew no matter what you do in life, and that's the most important thing to remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
I eat is I eat, no matter what.
Yes.
Eat is I eat.
Every Jew is born a prince, so we remain princes, right?
Right.
If I could say, I'd like to say one small Yiddish phrase for your audience, which was taught to me many years ago by a very Orthodox colleague of mine who worked with me professionally, and he said, "Es schwer zu sein a Yid, aber es soll Geschmack."
Okay, for those not familiar, it's difficult to be a Jew, but it certainly is sweet.
Exactly.
Okay, so with this, we thank you very much for participating. And we wish everyone else in the Vayichan program, we should take this message. We want to build a base of Mikdash quickly in our day. And the way to do this is through obvious Israel, and certainly to stay as far removed as possible from sinas chinam, baseless hatred, for no reason whatsoever. Interestingly, is that we know that the temple was destroyed for many reasons. And yet, everyone know if they would violate Avodah Zarah, inappropriate worship or sexual crimes, they would know they're wrong. Apparently people think that baseless hatred applies to someone else and doesn't apply to me. We're going to take the lesson to heart. No matter what, this is going to be taboo, verboten, and we shan't violate. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.